The universe is indifferent to the struggles of men. The Dan River flows through North Carolina, just as it did 1,000 years ago, muddy and slow, carrying the silt of the earth towards the ocean, without judgment, without memory. But if you stand on its banks in the year 1848, and you listen past the sound of the water, you hear something else. You hear a violence. A rhythmic, mechanical violence that tears through the humid air of the South. It is the sound of the future arriving in a place that is desperate to remain in the past. It is the sound of steam. And the man controlling this steam, the man whose hand is on the lever of this industrial beast, is a man who, by the laws of this land, should not exist. His name is Thomas Day. To the census takers, he is a statistic, a free person of color, a contradiction in terms, a glitch in the terrifying logic of the antebellum South. But to history, which sees what the eyes of prejudice cannot, he is something far more terrifying to the established order. He is a master. We find ourselves in Milton, a small town, a collection of buildings huddled together against the vast, encroaching wilderness. Here, the social hierarchy is as rigid as the iron bars of a prison cell. White over black, master over slave. It is a world built on the absolute certainty of racial superiority. And yet, right here, in the center of this town, stands the Union Tavern, a workshop, a fortress. Inside these walls, the laws of gravity are suspended. Inside these walls, the world is inverted. Look at the machinery. In 1840, while others were still pushing planes by hand, sweating over rough timber with the slow agony of manual labor, Thomas Day was dreaming of fire. He installed a steam engine, a monster of cast iron and boiling water. It was one of the first in the entire region. Imagine the noise, the sheer deafening roar of the boiler, the screech of the saw blades ripping through mahogany and walnut. This was not just carpentry. This was dominion. Nature produces the wood wild, chaotic, twisted. But Thomas Day imposes order upon it. He uses the violence of the machine to create the silence of elegance. This is the paradox of the artist. To create something beautiful, one must first be willing to destroy. He took the rough skin of the tree and flayed it, polished it, bent it to his will until it shone like a mirror. And in doing so, he became the primary architect of the region's domestic reality, the governors of North Carolina, the presidents of universities, the wealthy planters who held the lives of hundreds in their hands. When they went home at night, when they sat down to dinner, when they slept in their beds, they were held up by the work of Thomas Day. They lived inside his creation. He surrounded them. The very people who upheld the laws that restricted his freedom were the ones who could not live without his craft. They needed his old-world elegance to validate their status. They needed his genius to prove their own sophistication. And so they allowed the anomaly to persist. But the true machinery of Thomas Day was not made of iron. It was made of psychology. Let us look closer at the workshop floor. Through the haze of sawdust, we see figures moving. We see the sweat on their brows. We see the muscles straining. And we see the color of their skin. They are white men, journeymen, apprentices from good families, and they are taking orders. This is the authority gap. This is the abyss that Thomas Day had to cross every single morning of his life. How does a black man in 1850 command a white man? He cannot use the whip. He cannot use the law. He cannot use the threat of violence. Those tools belong to the enemy. Instead, he must use a weapon that is far more rare and far more difficult to forge. He must use absolute, undeniable competence. He had to be so undeniably superior in his craft, so staggering in his vision, that the racial hierarchy simply dissolved. In the face of his genius, the white apprentice forgets, for a moment, that he is white and remembers only that he is a student in the presence of a master. It is a hypnotic power to force the world to judge you by the work of your hands rather than the color of your skin, in a time when the skin was everything. He created an unseen empire within the workshop. Outside, on the street, he had to be careful. He had to step off the sidewalk. He had to show deference. But inside, he was the king, and they knew it. Look at the furniture itself. It speaks a language of its own, the day style. It is heavy. It is substantial. It is not the delicate, fragile furniture of the French courts. It is the furniture of the American frontier, filtered through a mind that understands power. Notice the scrolls, the S shapes. They spiral out like smoke, like waves, like something organic and uncontrollable. Art historians will tell you this is the Empire style, or the Gothic revival. But look closer. There is a rhythm here that is not European. There is a syncopation, a looseness in the symmetry. Is it possible that in these curves, Thomas Day was carving the memories of a heritage he was forced to suppress? Is it possible that the exo-style, those strange, exuberant shapes that seem to defy the rigidity of the wood, was his way of screaming in a room where he was required to whisper? We cannot know his mind. The records are sparse. The man himself left no diary, no manifesto. He left only the wood. The wood is his testimony. It stands in the silent hallways of history, dark and gleaming, a physical record of a man who refused to be small. But even an emperor of wood and steam is subject to the cruelty of time. The 1850s were a golden hour, but the sun was setting. The panic of 1857 shook the economy. The debts piled up. The patrons, those wealthy men who smiled at him in the daylight, began to retreat into the shadows as the political climate darkened. The Civil War was approaching like a thunderstorm on the horizon. The air grew heavy with the static of coming violence. Thomas Day had built a bridge between two worlds, the black and the white, the slave and the free, the manual and the industrial. But bridges are the first things to be destroyed in a war. The South was radicalizing. The tolerance for free men of color was evaporating. The laws tightened around his neck like a noose. He had to petition the state just to let his wife live with him. Imagine the humiliation. To be the master of industry, to employ the sons of the elite, and yet to beg a group of politicians for the right to sleep under the same roof as the woman you love. This is the tragedy of the exception. You are tolerated only as long as you are useful. You are praised, yes, but you are never truly safe. You are always one mistake, one shift in the political wind, away from destruction. Thomas Day died in 1861, the same year the cannons fired on Fort Sumter, the same year the nation tore itself apart. He did not live to see the end of slavery. He did not live to see the collapse of the aristocracy he had furnished. The steam engine went cold. The boiler rusted. The noise of the workshop faded back into the silence of the Dan River. The apprentices left to fight a war to preserve a system that their master had quietly defied every day of his life. What remains of the master of Milton? Walk through the old houses of North Carolina today. The dust motes dance in the light. The floorboards creak. And there, in the corner, sits a bureau, a sideboard, a mantelpiece. Run your hand along the mahogany. It is cold, it is hard, but it is alive. It is a message sent from the past, bottled in wood and varnish. It says, I was here, I mattered, I commanded. In the grand, indifferent sweep of history, most names are washed away like footprints in the mud. But Thomas Day carved his name deep. He carved it into the very foundation of the society that tried to exclude him. He remains an enigma, a shadow that casts a shadow, a man who built a throne for himself in a land that wanted him in chains. The steam is gone, the man is gone, but the authority remains. The master of Milton sleeps, but his empire is still standing.